Single dad gave up his seat for twin girls, not knowing their mom was a millionaire. Evan Mercer had never been one to leave his little riverside town in Montana. He fixed bikes, mended fences, and raised his son, Jamie, in a cabin nestled between pine trees and silence. Life was simple, sometimes painfully so, but it was safe. Predictable. And after losing his wife to cancer 4 years ago, safe was all Evan had the energy for. Then one Thursday morning, as he was sweeping sawdust from his workshop floor, a delivery van pulled up. The man handed him a small envelope with a gold stamp on it. Evan squinted at the name on the front. It was his. Inside was a formal letter, printed on thick paper that smelled faintly of cologne. Mr. Mercer, in recognition of your quiet heroism during last month's flood rescue in Clearwater County, Montana National Railways, would like to offer you a complimentary first-class ticket to anywhere along our cross-country route. Thank you for showing us the kind of courage that rarely makes headlines but always changes lives. Evan held the ticket in his hand, staring at the embossed destination line, Montana to Boston, first class. He almost laughed. He hadn't traveled more than 20 miles in years. But when he told Jamie that night, the boy's eyes lit up like Christmas. "Dad, Boston has trains that go under the ground," Jamie had shouted, nearly knocking over his cereal bowl. Evan smiled, a soft ache behind his ribs. "Yeah, maybe it's time we saw a little more of the world." He didn't have much to pack. Just a backpack with a flannel shirt, a copy of Jamie's favorite comic book, and a thermos of coffee. But tucked carefully between the pages of the comic was a hand-drawn map Jamie had made the night before. A crayon train with 2 stick figures in the window, waving. Underneath it said, "Dad's Big Adventure." Evan boarded the train at dawn, not knowing that the real adventure wouldn't be found in the cities ahead, but in a single seat he was about to give up. The train hummed softly as it glided through golden hills and valleys, its rhythm a lullaby Evan didn't realize he missed until he sat back in his seat, first class no less. The seats were plush, wrapped in dark blue velvet, and a small glass of orange juice sat untouched on the tray beside him. He didn't quite know what to do with such comfort. He kept glancing out the window, instead, his hands wrapped tightly around his thermos like it was the only real thing on board. He had just opened Jamie's comic book, preparing to reread the boy's favorite story about a mechanic-turned-space hero, when he heard it, sniffling, then a hiccup, then soft sobs. Evan turned his head slightly and saw her, a little girl, maybe 5, with tight curls and a crumpled boarding pass in her lap. Her eyes were red from crying, her small fingers clutching the edge of the seat as if it might disappear beneath her. She sat alone, clearly frightened. A few rows back, a second sob echoed. Evan leaned forward. Another girl, identical, her twin, was struggling in the arms of a flustered train attendant, clearly trying to get to her sister. "I'm sorry," the attendant whispered to a nearby passenger. There was a mix-up during boarding. The girls were supposed to sit together, but first class was overbooked, their mothers in the back trying to sort out the luggage issue. Evan stood. He didn't think. He didn't weigh the comfort he was giving up or wonder if someone else might step in. He simply walked over to the sobbing girl and crouched beside her seat. "Hey there," he said gently, voice low like wind through trees. "This your seat?" She nodded through tears. "Well, it's all yours. But I was wondering if you'd let your sister come sit here instead." The girl blinked. Evan turned to the attendant. "Put the other one here. I'll take whatever seat's left." "But sir," the attendant said, "you paid for this. It's first class." Evan shrugged. "They're 5. They don't care about legroom." 10 minutes later, the twins were reunited, holding hands tightly in the oversized seat, now giggling softly between bites of animal crackers. Evan, now seated in coach between a man playing loud mobile games and a woman knitting furiously, didn't mind. He just leaned back, opened Jamie's comic again, and smiled. He had no idea that 3 cars behind him, their mother had just arrived, and had seen everything. Marissa Blake didn't often cry, but that morning, as she stood frozen at the entrance of car 6, she had to blink hard to keep her composure. She had boarded the train last, after resolving a lost luggage fiasco involving her assistant and a mix-up with her twins' matching backpacks. She had assumed Ellie and Grace would be seated together as always. She had double-checked the tickets. But somewhere between a late boarding call and a distracted conductor, her daughters had been separated. One in seat 1A, the other in coach. By the time Marissa had reached car 6, she found a man, tall, broad-shouldered, with worn jeans and a faded green flannel shirt, kneeling beside Ellie. He wasn't just talking to her, he was seeing her. The man offered her sister's seat without hesitation, then helped Ellie buckle in, gently wiping her tears with a napkin pulled from his own pocket. He even pulled 2 crayons from his backpack and handed them over like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Draw me something magical while I ride in the back, Captain," he told them with a wink, and just like that they laughed. No theatrics, no expectation of thanks. Just a kind stranger making 2 scared girls feel safe. Chisak sass. Marissa watched, unseen, through the gap between the cars. She didn't interrupt. She couldn't. Something about his presence, the calmness in his movements, the softness in his voice, made her stop. She hadn't seen someone treat her daughters with that much patience, that much ease, in a long time. Maybe ever. By the time she gathered herself and moved forward to speak, he was gone. Already disappeared down the aisle toward the back, leaving behind nothing but a wrinkled boarding pass on the seat and the sound of her daughters humming a song he had just taught them. Captain Flannel rides the rails over rivers, hills, and trails. Marissa sat down slowly beside her daughters. She was used to boardrooms and negotiation tables, to managing luxury hotel chains and multi-million-dollar expansions. But this was different, and it shook something loose inside her chest. She looked down at the vacant seat he had left behind and whispered, "Who are you?" That night, in the dim quiet of a suite overlooking Chicago's skyline, Marissa couldn't sleep. Her daughters were fast asleep in the adjoining room, tangled in hotel blankets with their crayons and coloring pages scattered around them. Half-finished portraits of Captain Flannel, complete with a mask made of bunny ears and a magical cookie tin. They had talked about him through dinner, through bath time, and even as they drifted off. To them, he was a hero. To Marissa, he was a mystery. She sat at the small writing desk near the window, her laptop open in front of her. She wasn't supposed to be working. She had promised the girls this trip was just for them. But her fingers hovered above the keyboard, tempted by habit. Instead of opening spreadsheets or emails, she typed into the search bar, "Man gives up train seat for child. Montana, first class." Nothing. She added, "Montana flood rescue." A few articles popped up, local papers, grainy photos. One in particular caught her breath. A man in a soaked flannel shirt pulling an elderly woman from a truck partially submerged in floodwater. The caption read, "Local mechanic Evan Mercer rescues 2 during Clearwater County floods." She zoomed in. The same gentle face, same watch on his wrist, same quiet strength. No LinkedIn, no official bio, no media coverage beyond those few local blurbs. He didn't seem to exist beyond the small town of Clearwater Ridge, but Marissa couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he had seen her daughters before even realizing who they belonged to, about how he had acted without hesitation, without a second glance at her first-class seat or his own comfort. She closed her laptop and stared out the window, lights twinkling like tiny cities in the distance. For someone who had built her life on luxury, ambition, and meticulously laid plans, she was completely disarmed by a man who seemed to have none of those things, and yet had everything that mattered. She whispered into the quiet room, "Where did you go, Evan Mercer?" And for the first time in years, she didn't want the answer for business. She wanted it for herself. They found him completely by accident. The next afternoon, as Marissa and her daughters stood in the bustle of Chicago's Union Station deciding between pizza or pretzels for lunch, Ellie pointed suddenly, her voice rising with excitement. "Mom, look! Captain Flannel!" Marissa turned just in time to see Evan Mercer walking out of a small newsstand, a granola bar in one hand, a dog-eared paperback sticking out of his coat pocket. He looked exactly the same, slightly ruffled, deeply kind, and completely unaware of the impact he'd left behind. Before she could say anything, her daughters had already taken off, barreling toward him like rockets on a mission. He turned at the sound of their laughter just in time to catch Grace in his arms and steady Ellie as she grabbed his coat. "Well, hey now," he laughed, kneeling between them. "You two again? You following me?" "No," Ellie said seriously. "We just wanted to say thank you, and we made a song about you." 3 verses, Grace added, with rhymes. Marissa approached slowly, her heels quieter than usual against the polished floor. Evan looked up and stood as she neared, offering a nod and a small smile. "I didn't think I'd see you again," he said. "Neither did I," Marissa admitted, "but apparently the universe, or at least these two, had other plans." He shifted his weight, clearly unsure what to do next. So she stepped forward, extended a hand. "Marissa Blake, their mom." "Evan Mercer," he said, shaking it gently. There was a brief pause. Not awkward, just charged, like the silence between tracks on a record that's about to change its tune. "I owe you dinner," she said. "You don't owe me anything," he replied. "I wasn't offering out of guilt," she countered. "I was offering because my daughters haven't stopped smiling since that train ride. And because they've requested spaghetti with meatballs. The big kind," Evan chuckled. "That's a serious request." "They said you're invited," Marissa added, "so unless you want to break a pair of 5-year-old hearts." He glanced at the girls, who were now dancing in a slow circle around a column, humming a vaguely familiar tune involving trains and cookies. Then he looked back at her. "Only if I get to tell bad jokes at the table," he said. "Deal," she said before she could stop herself. That night, they met at a cozy corner Italian place just off the riverfront. It wasn't fancy, not by her standards, but the girls lit up like it was a fairy tale. Evan arrived in a clean flannel shirt and brought with him a small box wrapped in newspaper comics. Inside were 2 identical keychains, tiny silver wrenches, each engraved with a single initial. "So you can fix things," he said, "just like you fixed my day." Dinner passed in laughter and meatball negotiations. Evan told stories of raccoons and flat tires, and the girls countered with dramatic retellings of Captain Flannel's train adventure, now complete with dragons and invisible tunnels. Marissa mostly listened, watching, studying this man who seemed so at ease with her daughters, who didn't try to impress anyone, but somehow impressed her most of all. And at some point, somewhere between dessert and the check, she realized something quietly terrifying. Humma. She didn't want the night to end. It was meant to be a detour, just a brief escape before returning to meetings, press releases, and the top-floor suite of the life she had carefully built. But when Grace, with marinara still on her chin, asked Evan where he lived, and he said, "A little valley town with big skies and quiet stars," the twins had begged to go. "Just for a day," they pleaded in unison. Evan had laughed and glanced at Marissa. "We've got more trees than Wi-Fi. Might not be your speed." But she had surprised even herself when she said, "That sounds perfect." 3 days later, her SUV climbed the narrow, winding road toward the town of Clearwater Ridge. The air grew thinner, fresher. The signal bars on her phone disappeared one by one until the screen read, "No service," and for the first time in months, she didn't mind. The girls sat in the back seat, humming their latest Captain Flannel ballad, their fingers sticky with juice from the roadside peaches Evan had insisted they stop to pick. When they pulled into town, it felt like stepping into a photograph. A single diner sat across from a hardware store. An old post office leaned slightly like it had survived 100 winters. And in front of a modest auto garage stood Evan, wiping his hands on a rag, grinning as if he'd been waiting all along. Beside him stood a young boy with a mess of brown hair and shoes too big for his feet. He held a glitter-covered sign that read, "Welcome, train friends." "That's Jamie," Evan said, opening the passenger door. "My world." Marissa smiled, her heart doing something it hadn't in a long time, soften without warning. The cabin was nestled behind a stretch of pine trees, its wooden walls aged and honest, the porch swaying gently in the mountain breeze. Inside, everything told a story. A mug painted with a child's name, a row of books with dog-eared corners, a picture frame cracked in one corner, holding a photo of Evan, Jamie, and a woman with kind eyes and a wind-blown smile. "She was my wife," Evan said quietly, catching Marissa's glance. "Anna. Been 4 years." "I'm sorry," she said. "We're okay," he replied. "Jamie keeps me anchored. And the valley doesn't ask much from you, just that you show up and stay a while." Marissa stood still in the center of the living room. The hardwood floors creaked beneath her heels, the scent of pine and lemon oil filled the air, and for a moment, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like someone returning to something she hadn't known she missed. That evening, as the sun dipped below the mountain line, the children ran barefoot across the yard chasing lightning bugs, laughter trailing behind them like ribbons in the wind. Evan handed Marissa a mug of homemade cocoa. "Jamie's recipe," he said, "heavy on the marshmallows, light on regrets." She took a sip. Sweet, rich, honest. They sat together on the porch swing as twilight folded itself over the valley. The stars blinked into view, quiet, sure, and unbothered by the chaos of the world beyond the hills. Marissa leaned back, her shoulders finally losing the tension they'd carried for years. "Feels like time slows down here," she whispered. Evan nodded. "Sometimes that's the only way to notice what really matters." And in that stillness, beneath a sky full of stars and the hum of distant crickets, Marissa realized she didn't want this to be a detour, consue. She wanted it to be a beginning. How are you feeling about the story so far? I'd really love to know what you think. Did it touch your heart or maybe remind you of something from your own life? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're at it, tell me, where in the world are you listening from? I'd love to see how far this story travels. It was Jamie's idea. After dinner, with everyone full of cocoa and stories, he tugged at Evan's sleeve and said, "We should take them to the meadow." "What meadow?" Grace asked, eyes lighting up. Jamie pointed past the tree line, where the last sliver of daylight painted the sky in soft gold, the one where the fireflies live. Evan raised an eyebrow. "Fireflies, huh? You sure they're out tonight?" Jamie nodded solemnly. "I checked the wind, and it smells like a firefly night." So they went, armed with jars poked full of holes, flashlights wrapped in colored tissue, and peanut butter sandwiches packed in a brown paper bag Jamie insisted were for energy emergencies. The meadow sat just past the edge of Evan's property, a small clearing cradled by tall grass and whispering pines. It wasn't big, or impressive, or even particularly well known, but as they stepped into the field it felt like entering something sacred. Actitus. The first firefly blinked above Ellie's head, then another, then dozens. Actitus. "Oh my gosh," Marissa whispered, breath-catching. It was like the stars had fallen from the sky and decided to dance among them. The girls ran laughing, spinning in circles, reaching for glowing lights with cupped hands. Jamie instructed them carefully, "Be gentle. Fireflies are shy," and offered spare jars with serious nods of approval. Evan lit an old oil lantern and set it between two logs. The glow was soft, amber, a warm heartbeat in the center of the night. Marissa sat beside him, a blanket draped over her knees, her hair messy from the breeze. "They're so free here," she said, watching her daughters. "Like they remember how to be kids again." "They didn't forget," Evan said quietly. "They were just waiting for the right moment." They sat in silence, the good kind, while laughter echoed through the trees and tiny lights floated like living sparks in the dark. Marissa reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something folded and worn, a pencil sketch on thick paper. "I was going to wait," she said, "but something about this place." She handed it to him. Evan unfolded the paper slowly. It was a drawing, detailed, elegant, full of soul. His cabin lit by lantern light. 5 figures on the porch swing. Fireflies swirling around them like stars. On the back, one line in neat handwriting. "Home isn't where you land. It's who's holding the lantern when you get there." Evan stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. "You drew this?" She nodded. "Used to sketch all the time. Architecture made it feel like a job. But this felt like something worth remembering." He didn't respond right away. He just folded the sketch carefully and tucked it inside his shirt pocket, like it was something sacred. Just then, Grace came bounding up, breathless. She held up a jar with one firefly glowing steadily inside. "I named him Franklin," she declared. "He's our official friendship bug. You have to make a wish." Marissa laughed. "Is that the rule?" Jamie nodded. "Legally binding." Evan leaned toward the jar. "Ladies first." Marissa closed her eyes. Evan followed. And in the hush between firefly flickers, without a single word spoken aloud, they both made a wish. The kind that changes everything. The next morning brought sunlight pouring through the cabin windows and the smell of pancakes in the air. The girls were already up, hair wild, giggling as they built a fortress of couch cushions and mismatched blankets in the living room. Marissa found a note waiting for her at the breakfast table. tucked beneath her coffee cup and decorated with sparkly star stickers. To Ms. Marissa, from Jamie Mercer, age 8. Don't tell Dad I wrote this. Thank you for being nice to my dad. He always takes care of everybody, even when he's tired. I think he forgets how to take care of himself sometimes. But he's been smiling more since you got here. Like, for real smiling. Not just the kind you do for other people. So I hope you stay. Also, you make better pancakes than he does. But don't tell him I said that. P.S. If you stay longer, I can teach you how to fix a flat tire. That's how you know you really live here. Marissa smiled, the words hitting deeper than she expected. It wasn't just sweet, it was honest. And it echoed something she'd been quietly wondering since the moment they stepped into this town. What if she wasn't just visiting? She folded the letter gently and slipped it into her purse beside last night's sketch. Then she rose, walked out to the garage where Evan was tightening bolts on a rusted red pickup, and leaned against the doorway. "You always work this early?" she asked. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Only when I want to avoid dishes." She held up the letter. "Your son's a truth-teller." He wiped his hands on a rag, eyes narrowing. "Uh-oh, what did he say?" "That you smiled differently now." Evan paused, caught off guard. "Huh, guess I hadn't noticed." "I did," she said, her voice softer. "So did I." The silence that followed was comfortable. Familiar. Like the space between breaths. "Allils. I used to think second chances were things other people got," Evan said, turning a wrench slowly. "People who hadn't already messed up once." "And now?" Marissa asked. He looked at her, really looked. "Now I think they just come disguised. As train rides. Or fireflies. Or women who show up in high heels and start flipping pancakes better than I ever could." She laughed and stepped closer. "I came here thinking I needed a break," she said. "But I think what I really needed was to stop pretending that busy and fulfilled are the same thing." He nodded slowly. "It's a hard thing to let go of. The version of yourself that looks good from a distance." They stood in that small garage, surrounded by the scent of motor oil and sun-warmed wood, and something settled between them. Not rushed, not uncertain, just right. Marissa reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper, one she'd scribbled on a sleepless night in a hotel room. She handed it to him. "I wasn't sure I'd ever show this to anyone." Evan opened it. One sentence, written in her own neat, intentional hand. "Stop mistaking success for worth." He folded it once, then again, and tucked it into the chest pocket of his flannel, close to his heart. "I think," he said, voice quiet, "we both needed someone to remind us who we were before the world told us who to be." And that afternoon, while the children ran barefoot through the yard building friendship forts, Marissa and Evan sat shoulder to shoulder on the porch, not saying much at all, because some second chances arrive not with grand gestures, but with fireflies, letters, and the courage to stay a little longer. It rained that night, not the kind that swept through with wind and fury, but a soft, steady mist that wrapped the valley in quiet. The cabin windows fogged slightly, and the fireplace crackled with a lazy rhythm that made everything feel slower, safer. Inside, the girls lay in a heap of pillows and blankets on the floor, their friendship fort now upgraded to a firefly embassy, with a paper flag and official marshmallow stash. Jamie was halfway through telling an elaborate story about Franklin the Firefly becoming a space explorer when he nodded off mid-sentence, his hand still holding a flashlight like a beacon. Evan gently covered him with a blanket and rose to find Marissa by the fireplace, holding a mug of cocoa and staring at the photos above the mantel. She didn't turn as he approached, just asked softly, "Did you ever feel like your life got paused and no one ever hit play again?" Evan stood beside her, studying the photos. One of them showed Anna, his late wife, laughing on the porch swing, her hair flying in the wind, Ruby just a toddler in her arms. "All the time," he said. After Anna, "I think I confused survival with living. Got good at fixing engines, repairing things, but I stopped letting anyone fix me." Marissa nodded, her voice quiet. "I know that feeling. I built a business that ran like a machine, polished, perfect, but I forgot how to be part of anything that wasn't scheduled." She looked at him now, really looked. His eyes weren't sad, just weathered, like someone who'd faced storms and chosen to stay rooted. "You didn't just fix a train seat that day, Evan," she said. "You fixed something in them, and maybe something in me too." He gave a small laugh. Funny. I was about to say the same about you. Then, almost bashfully, he reached into the drawer of the side table and pulled out a small, laminated card. He held it out to her. It was a first-class train ticket. Unused, edges creased. On the back, in blue crayon, Jamie had written, "Good for one lifetime ride. Non-refundable, non-transferable." Marissa stared at it, then back at him. "You kept this?" Reminded me that sometimes, when you give up your seat, you end up exactly where you were supposed to go. She didn't speak. She just stepped closer and gently, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was quiet, sure, and deeply earned. Later that evening, after the kids had been tucked into their blanket fort under the soft hum of rain, Evan found Marissa standing on the porch with her shoes off, eyes closed, face tilted to the sky. "When I was a little girl," she said, "I used to think rain was the world's way of starting over." He stepped up beside her. "You think we're allowed to start over?" "I think," she said, sliding her hand into his, "we already have." And inside that garage he once called his whole world, and outside the cabin that once only echoed with memory, a new rhythm began. One not built on grief or ambition, but on something gentler, something real, because Evan Mercer had spent years fixing broken things. And now, finally, something was fixing him back. The morning sun broke through the clouds like a quiet promise. No fanfare, just light easing over the trees, painting the cabin's roof in gold. Birds chirped lazily from the branches. Inside, the scent of cinnamon pancakes wafted from the kitchen, competing with the sound of 3 girls arguing about which syrup was superior, maple or strawberry. Marissa stood at the stove, barefoot, wearing one of Evan's oversized flannel shirts over her pajamas. Her hair was messy, her phone was on silent, and for the first time in years she wasn't rushing toward a deadline. Jamie sat at the counter, scribbling designs for a treehouse expansion module, while Ellie and Grace presented their syrup debate like it was an international summit. Ruby, ever the diplomat, proposed a third option: mix them. Evan watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart full. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Marissa laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and flipped a pancake shaped vaguely like a star. Then she glanced at Evan. This might be the best boardroom I've ever worked in. He walked over, stole a piece of strawberry off her plate, and kissed the top of her head. Later that day, while the kids played outside building an elaborate blanket maze between the trees, Marissa sat on the porch with Evan beside her and opened her laptop for the first time in a week. He watched her carefully. "You sure?" he asked. "No," she said, smiling. "But I'm done waiting for sure to give me permission." She opened a blank document, titled it simply, "To the Langston Board." Then she began to type, "To the Board of Langston Hotels. Effective immediately, I am stepping away from daily executive responsibilities. I have spent most of my life believing that leadership meant control, speed, and productivity. But recently, I've learned that leadership without presence is hollow, and that success without joy is just exhaustion in disguise. The hotels will run, the meetings will happen. The stock will rise and fall. But I will no longer measure my worth by quarterly projections or public approval. I'm choosing stillness. I'm choosing to be a mother. And if life allows, maybe something more. With respect and deep gratitude, Marissa Blake." She hovered for a moment, then clicked send. There was no applause, no press release. Just a warm breeze, the quiet of the mountains, and Evan's hand slipping into hers. "You okay?" he asked. "I think I'm finally me," she whispered. News traveled quickly, as it always does. Business blogs speculated. Headlines asked dramatic questions. A few tabloids guessed she'd had a breakdown. But those who knew her, the few who mattered, understood. They recognized the quiet joy in her eyes when she appeared in the town's tiny grocery store days later, letting 2 girls argue over cereal while holding hands with a man in a flannel shirt. She didn't need to explain. Joyous and in a flare, she was home. Noyan and Evan? He didn't care about LinkedIn trends or headlines. He cared that she sat with the kids during dinner, that she asked Ruby about her dreams. that she left her phone on the nightstand and her walls at the door. Because in this life they were building, not scheduled, not polished, but real. He had finally stopped surviving and started living again. A week later, just before sunset, Evan stood in front of his garage with a hammer, a level, and a wooden sign freshly painted in a deep blue Jamie had chosen himself. The girls had helped. Each of them took a brush, added stars, fireflies, and one slightly crooked wrench. At the top, in bold, hand-painted letters, it read, Captain Flannel's Garage. Repairs of all kinds. Mechanical. Emotional. Unexpected. Marissa stood beside him, holding the last screw. "You sure about this name?" she asked, smiling. Evan shrugged. "It's accurate." She handed him the screw. "Then, it's official." They hung the sign together, careful, deliberate. And when it was straight, Evan stepped back, squinting at it in the golden light. "It's not flashy," he said, "but it's real," Marissa replied, "and it's yours." He turned to her, that familiar quiet in his eyes. "Ours, maybe?" She didn't answer. She just reached into her purse and pulled out something wrapped in soft cloth. Inside was a plaque. Engraved in silver, it read, "To Evan Mercer, for fixing more than broken things. Thank you for holding the lantern." He didn't say anything. Just blinked hard and hugged her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had once felt fragile. That night, over a dinner of grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, made mostly by the girls, with Evan stepping in only to prevent a minor kitchen fire, Ruby passed around cookies, shaped like little trains. Grace insisted on making everyone take an official friendship oath, which mostly involved holding hands and promising not to move away. When bedtime came, Ellie curled up in the guest room she now called the captain's quarters. Ruby shared her pillow with Janie, and the house fell into a rhythm that felt like it had always been there, like they had all just been waiting for the right time to arrive. Later, while the stars blinked over the valley and the crickets played their night songs, Evan sat on the porch, whittling a small block of wood into the shape of a train car. Marissa came out with 2 mugs of cocoa, wearing that same flannel shirt she had now permanently stolen from him. She handed him the mug. "I never told you this," she said, "but the day we met, I almost got off the train before it even left." He turned, surprised. "Why?" "I was tired. Not in the body, but in the soul. Everything in my life felt heavy. Pretend." She looked out into the dark. "But then I saw you, kneeling in front of my daughters, talking to them like they mattered, like they weren't an inconvenience. I hadn't seen that in a long time." Evan was quiet for a moment, then reached into his back pocket. He unfolded a slip of paper, worn and soft at the edges. It was Jamie's original train ticket, laminated now. On the back, still visible in crayon, good for 1 lifetime ride. Non-refundable, non-transferable. He handed it to her. "I saved this," he said, "because it's how everything started." She held it carefully, like something sacred. "I accept," she whispered, and she leaned in, kissed him. No fireworks, no music, just 2 people who had stopped pretending, stopped running, and finally stayed. Autumn arrived in Clearwater Ridge with a painter's grace, brushstrokes of amber, gold, and rust streaking across the trees like memories settling gently into the land. The wind turned cooler, the sky a deeper shade of blue, and the porch swing creaked with the rhythm of a life well lived. By now, no one in town was surprised to see Marissa Blake walking through the market with flour on her jeans and a child on each hand. The townsfolk had stopped whispering after the second week. They had started waving. Man, the cabin had changed too, though not in ways you'd see from the road. Inside, the once silent hallways now echoed with laughter and the patter of mismatched socks on wooden floors. There were art supplies next to spark plugs, bedtime books beside socket wrenches, and pancake mornings that ended with everyone still in pajamas by noon. The girls had merged into a trio. Ruby, Ellie, and Grace now considered themselves the Fix-It Club, sworn to mend everything from broken toys to broken moods. Jamie had elected himself president, of course, and was currently drafting bylaws. On one particular afternoon in late October, Marissa stopped by the local post office to mail a package. Just before she left, Something caught her eye, a newly installed bulletin board titled Clearwater Honors Wall of Quiet Heroes. Pinned to the top was a photo. It was grainy, clearly taken on that first day. It showed two small girls curled up in a first-class train seat, their faces peaceful in sleep. Crouched beside them was a man in a green flannel shirt, tying one of their shoelaces, his face half-turned and completely unaware he was being watched. Below it, someone had handwritten, "Kindness doesn't need an audience, just someone who notices. E. Mercer, first inductee." Marissa blinked hard. Not because she was surprised, but because this was the version of Evan that most people didn't know. The one who saved others, without asking to be remembered. That evening, she returned to the cabin, the sun dipping behind the hills like it always did, softly, steadily. Evan sat on the porch swing, sanding the edges of a new birdhouse, a mug of cocoa beside him, as if he had never left that moment in time where peace quietly arrived and decided to stay. She sat beside him and said, "They put you on a wall today." He smiled. "Did they spell my name right?" She chuckled. "Close enough." A beat passed. "I never told you this," she added, "but I was really going to leave that train. Just walk away from everything. I didn't know where I'd go. I just didn't want to go back." He turned to her, patient, present. "What stopped you?" She looked up at the sky, glowing like fire through the trees. "Two girls who needed me, and then a man who reminded me what real looks like." Evan was silent for a long time. Then he stood, went inside, and returned with something carefully wrapped in a napkin. It was Ruby's old drawing, the one from months ago, the crayon sketch of a train labeled Dad's Big Adventure. At the bottom, in looping purple handwriting, Ruby had added something since. "Home isn't where you land, it's where someone waits for you." Marissa held it against her chest, tears catching in her throat. "You kept this," she whispered. Evan nodded, because that was the day everything started to make sense again. Then, quietly, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small box. Not velvet, not a ring, just something simple. Inside was a key, old, brass, worn. "It's not a proposal," he said gently. "Not yet. It's an invitation. To stay, to build, to fix things together." Marissa looked up at him, her eyes brimming but clear. "I was already staying," she said. "This just makes it official." Weeks later, a second sign appeared next to the garage one, this one painted in bright, childlike colors, letters uneven, joyfully imperfect. "Welcome to the seat that changed everything. Fixes friendships, and Firefly nights. Available daily." Tourists would pass through Clearwater and stop to take pictures. But the locals, the ones who'd lived the story, didn't need a sign. They knew. Because in a small cabin beneath the pines, beside a garage filled with engine parts and crayon drawings, a man and a woman sat on a porch swing, no longer waiting, no longer searching. Just being, and 3 children slept soundly in the rooms behind them, wrapped in quilts and firefly dreams, held not by walls, but by the kind of love that never needed an audience to be real, because it had all started with one seat, one moment, one choice to be kind, and from that small, quiet act came everything. If this story moved you, reminded you that healing is real, or renewed your belief in second chances, we invite you to subscribe to Healing Stories. Here, we share real-life journeys of strength, love, and hope. Stories that speak straight to the soul. Thank you for being here. And always remember, no matter how far you fall, there's always a way back to the light. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let us know.